Once upon a time, there lived a poor orphan named Uma. She was breathtakingly beautiful but had no home, wandering the streets from place to place, begging just to survive. Uma had lost her parents in a tragic car crash a decade ago. She was only 6 when it happened, and ever since, she had been living on the streets, sleeping beneath bridges and under flickering street lamps. Over the years, she took up all kinds of menial work to keep herself going. But one night, everything changed. It seemed like an ordinary calm evening. Uma came across an elderly woman who kindly offered her a plate of food. Starving and exhausted, Uma was overwhelmed with gratitude. She curled into a corner and devoured the meal as if her life depended on it. The taste was unlike anything she'd had in a long time. Even though her belly was full, she kept eating. Who knew when she'd get another chance at a proper meal, let alone one this good? When she was finally done, her stomach was stretched, her body heavy with fatigue. She stumbled back to her usual sleeping spot and collapsed into a deep, dreamless sleep. Her limbs fell still like wood, and she surrendered herself to the night. But hours later, Uma awoke to something horrifying. She was no longer outside, but inside a strange shrine, bound, alongside other unconscious girls around her age. Panic surged through her as her eyes adjusted to the dim light. Then, a man entered, a juju priest. He stared at her in shock. "Impossible," he muttered, his voice low and disturbed. He pointed at her and declared that the spirits had rejected her. Without hesitation, he commanded them to release her. Uma was freed immediately, and she ran with all the strength her legs could manage, bolting into the forest. She had never felt such terror in her life. She weaved through the thick, dark woods, thorns tearing at her clothes. Eventually, she stumbled onto a deserted road, with no clue where she was. Still barefoot, starving, and trembling, she pressed forward. Her clothes were ripped, her body scraped, and every rustle in the bushes made her heart jump, but she didn't dare stop. A voice inside her warned that staying still could be even more dangerous. As dawn neared, she spotted lights glowing ahead. She had arrived at a part of the city she had never seen before. Elegant storefronts, grand display windows, mannequins in luxurious outfits, everything reeked of wealth and status. Uma stood, wide-eyed, outside one of the boutiques, catching her breath. Just then, a tall, elegant woman stepped out. "Do you like the dresses?" she asked. Uma nodded shyly. The woman smiled and beckoned her. "Come inside with me." Uma hesitated, then slowly followed. The woman led her to a changing area and handed her a stunning dress. "There's a shower inside. Clean up and try this on," she said. Uma rushed inside eagerly. After scrubbing off the dirt and washing away the horror of the night, she slipped into the dress. She stared at her reflection, stunned by how radiant she looked. "You're just perfect," the woman said with a soft smile, clapping her hands above her head. Uma blinked, confused. Why had she done that? Before she could process it, a huge man emerged from a back door and pricked her neck with a needle. Darkness swallowed her. She awoke hours later, lying stiff in a coffin tucked in the back room. She tried to move, but her body didn't respond. Then she realized, she was now behind the boutique's show glass. To the world, she looked like just another mannequin. But Uma was fully conscious. Her limbs frozen, her eyes wide, her mouth sealed. She saw now that the other mannequins were just like her, once living, breathing girls, now cursed into silence. Some had been trapped for months, others for years. Their faces smiled flawlessly, but their eyes screamed in agony. Uma longed to scream, but no sound came. She couldn't turn her head or even blink. She stood there, stuck in a fixed pose, one hand on her hip, the other limp by her side. The golden dress she wore sparkled under the boutique lights. The boutique lights gleamed softly. Uma was now the newest attraction, the latest mannequin to join the haunting lineup displayed in Madame Kadu's storefront. Each morning, as the boutique opened, wealthy women came in to shop. Some paused by the glass, peering in. A few even tapped lightly or whispered to each other that the mannequins looked oddly lifelike. But only one person knew the truth, Madame Kadu. When night fell, and the final light flickered out, the curse weakened just enough for the trapped girls to speak. Only then did Uma hear her first voice. "New girl," came a faint whisper beside her. "Don't resist the curse, struggling makes it worse." Uma couldn't move her head, but she listened closely. "We were all like you once," another voice murmured from her right. "Runaways. Homeless girls hoping for something better." The voice belonged to Nick. She shared her story, her voice soft and distant. Nick had been born on the street. Her mother, mentally ill, raised her among dumpsters and flooded gutters. She'd washed in rainwater and danced at traffic stops for spare change, always hoping someone would save her. Then, one day, a woman stopped. She was kind, Nick whispered. Offered me bread, malt, a place to sleep. Just for one night. That night, they dressed Nick in silk and asked her to try it on. She stood before a mirror, modeling the outfit. The next thing she remembered was darkness. When I woke up, I was here. Frozen. They said I had the perfect frame for display, she added bitterly. But all I wanted was to be seen as a person, not a prop. Beside her stood Foma, whose voice was slow and filled with pain. My father sold me, she whispered, for a bottle of gin. Uma's heart ached. Foma had been the brightest student in her village. She dreamed of becoming a teacher. But after her mother died, her father grew angry and violent. One day, a strange woman visited their village. She spoke to Foma's father and offered to take the burden from him, in exchange for a sack of money and a crate of gin. I begged him, Foma said, but he never even looked at me. They brought her to the city, promising work as a housemaid. But she was never allowed outside again. I was 13. I've been here since. My body grew up, but I didn't. Her eyes glistened under the boutique's soft glow. Then, from the far end of the display, a more poised mannequin finally spoke. Her presence was regal. My name is Victoria, she said, her voice calm and cold, like someone who had run out of tears long ago. I wasn't poor, she revealed. My parents owned a pharmacy. I had everything, school, love, dreams. Until I met him. Victoria had fallen for an older man she met online. He called her queen, said she was mature beyond her years. He sent gifts, promised marriage. One weekend, she slipped away to meet him, and never returned. He brought me here, she said. To Madame Kadu. Victoria became the boutique's very first mannequin. The one they called the original showstopper. They used me to lure others, she said. If I could be trapped, anyone could. As the stories unfolded, something inside Uma shifted. Every mannequin was a girl stolen, tricked, or betrayed. Their beauty now served as display, but their souls were still alive, trapped inside. Why me? Uma asked, her voice tight, barely escaping through clenched teeth. Victoria answered, her voice steady. Because you're beautiful. The more beautiful you are, the more customers you attract. Uma was stunned. She could barely believe what she was hearing. She asked, almost begged, if there was any way out. But Victoria only shook her head gently. There's no escape. Once the spirit in the coffin bonds with you, you're marked forever. Uma's stomach turned to stone. No way out, she repeated in a whisper, her chest tightening. She stood there, helpless, as the first rays of dawn lit up the sky. The boutique's door opened, and the usual crowd of rich shoppers flooded in. Uma hadn't eaten or slept in days. Her body ached with weakness, but she had no control over it. She stood frozen, smiling, as hands tapped on the glass and eyes admired her golden dress. She tried to scream. But her lips wouldn't move. It felt like screaming silently while everyone around you smiled, unaware that you were dying inside. For days, Uma endured the torment. Each morning, she posed in silence. Each night, she listened to the voices of other lost girls. They were once girls with dreams, with names, now reduced to silent ornaments behind glass. But on the seventh night, something changed. A single tear slipped down Uma's cheek. Just one. She was stunned. Nick, beside her, gasped when she noticed. "You cried?" Nick whispered, awestruck. "We've tried for months to shed even a drop. No one ever could." She told Uma that something was different, the curse seemed to be fading around her. From her place at the far end of the display, Victoria's voice echoed faintly. "The coffin didn't claim you fully," she said. "Your soul, it wasn't sealed the way ours were. That's why you can still weep." Uma remained frozen, but her heart pounded violently within. That night, while the other mannequins muttered in frustration, Uma felt something shift. Her index finger moved, just a little. A twitch. She could hardly believe it. Joy surged inside her. It was the first sign of hope she'd felt in days. She spent the entire night concentrating, pouring her will into that tiny motion. Warmth crept into her other fingers. Slowly, steadily, they too began to stir. When morning broke, Uma stood still, like every other day. People passed by, admiring her shimmering dress. Then someone saw it. She moved, a young woman cried out, pointing in shock. Uma flexed her fingers again. Murmurs rippled through the crowd outside. Faces pressed against the glass. "She's alive." Her hand moved. "Look, she's pointing." "No, wait, she's crying." "Oh my God, she's crying." Fresh tears streaked down Uma's cheeks, cutting through the painted foundation like rivers through dust. Her trembling fingers continued to twitch, delicate and frantic. People gasped. Phones came out. Videos were recorded. The murmurs grew louder. Inside, Madame Kadu appeared calm as she stepped forward. She smiled politely and addressed the growing crowd. "Oh, that one," she said with a laugh. "She's a specialty mannequin. Imported all the way from China." The crowd hesitated. Confused. "She moves, and cries," Madame Kadu added with a smirk. "That's the new tech. It cost me a fortune, very exclusive. Emotion-sensitive mannequins," she continued. "They're all the rage over there." And just like that, the tension dissolved. People nodded, impressed by the technology. They apologized for their reaction and even chuckled at how real it looked. Uma's heart sank. She had thought, for one fragile second, that this was it. That someone would break the glass, pull her out, save her. But instead, they laughed. Smiled. Took photos. And left. Her body remained stiff, only her fingers moved now. Her lips stayed sealed in a painted, frozen smile. Later that evening, long after the boutique had closed, Madame Kadu sat alone in her office. A glass of wine in her hand, her face composed, but her eyes burned with fury. "How did I miss this?" she muttered bitterly. She slammed the glass down and picked up the phone. "Bring her in," she snapped at the man in the back room. It was the same bodyguard, the one who had pricked Uma with a needle before. He entered silently. "Get her off that display now," Madame Kadu ordered. "Before she opens her mouth. Before she brings this entire place down." He nodded and left the room. A few minutes later, Uma was lifted from the glass stand. She fought inside, she wanted to scream, to punch, to run, but her body stayed frozen. Only her fingers moved, feebly pinching his arm. But it was useless. He carried her away effortlessly. Inside the boutique, the other mannequins stood silent, shaken. "Where are they taking her?" Nick whispered, fear trembling in her voice. Their eyes locked on the back door, helpless. The man brought Uma into a dim, frigid room. The walls were lined with shattered mirrors, discarded mannequin parts, and several coffins, some open, some scratched from the inside. He laid her on a hard metal table. She couldn't move. Couldn't even blink. Madame Kadu walked in slowly, her heels echoing against the concrete. The bodyguard stood at her side. "You foolish girl," she said coldly. "You want to ruin everything for me?" Madame Kadu glared at Uma, fury written all over her face. "I had such big plans for you," she spat, standing over Uma's still body. "And you chose to ruin everything." Uma's heart pounded with fear. She couldn't move, couldn't scream, only lay there, helpless. With a snap of her fingers, Madame Kadu summoned the massive bodyguard. He stepped forward silently, a syringe glinting in his hand. "End this," she ordered, turning away. Uma's thoughts raced. She prayed quietly in her mind, a final plea to the heavens. After all the pain she had endured, was this how it would end? But as tears welled behind her frozen eyes, she felt a strange peace, perhaps she'd see her parents again. Maybe the suffering was over. Just then, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the room. Madame Kadu collapsed to the floor. Uma, shocked, stared as the bodyguard, the same man who had paralyzed her, stood over her lifeless body, the empty syringe still in hand. He knelt beside Uma quickly, pulling out a small bottle. "Drink this," he said urgently, tipping it into her mouth. Uma coughed, then gasped. Warmth rushed through her limbs. Sensation returned. She blinked rapidly, unable to process what had just happened. The man knelt in front of her, eyes full of regret. "I'm sorry," he said, voice shaking. "This is all my fault." Uma stared at him, confused. "I killed your parents," he said softly. Her mouth opened in disbelief. He continued, revealing the truth. Years ago, the day of the accident that changed her life, Uma had been asleep in the back seat of her parents' car. Her father had swerved to avoid hitting a small boy chasing a runaway ball. The car spun out of control, crashing into a tree and bursting into flames. Her parents died instantly. She had survived. And that boy, the one who had caused the crash, was now kneeling in front of her. His name was Chimi. He told her how he had watched in horror as the accident unfolded. He'd rushed to her side, sobbing and calling for help. She had a distinct birthmark behind her ear, a mark he never forgot. Years later, when Uma arrived at the boutique, he recognized it instantly. Chimi had worked under Madame Kadu for years, silently obeying her orders. At first, it was out of fear. She threatened his family, warned him of what would happen if he resisted. Eventually, fear turned to numbness, and numbness turned into compliance. But when Uma arrived, something in him broke. He couldn't let her suffer, not after everything he had already taken from her. So, instead of using the paralysis serum Madame Kadu demanded, he injected her with a temporary numbing agent, just enough to mimic the symptoms. It was that act of rebellion that saved her. Because the ritual couldn't fully bind her soul, the spirits couldn't take hold. That was why she could still feel. That was why, on the seventh night, her fingers had moved. Uma trembled as the truth sank in. Her muscles tingled as life returned to her limbs. The stiffness faded. Her breathing grew rapid. Chimi grabbed her by the shoulders. "There's no time," he said urgently. "You need to run. Get help." Without another word, Uma bolted from the boutique. Her bare feet slapped against the cold pavement. Her once elegant dress was torn, her face streaked with tears. She burst into a nearby police station, out of breath and shaking. The officers inside froze, stunned by the sight of a barefoot girl in a gold gown, her face pale with terror. She looked like a ghost, a girl dragged out from death's grasp, and the officers couldn't tear their eyes away. "Please," she begged, gripping the counter with trembling hands. The mannequins, they're alive. They're real girls. You have to help them. The officers exchanged bewildered looks. You need to calm down, miss, one of them said gently. Which boutique are you talking about? Madame Kadu's. Uma cried. I was one of them. She's turning girls into mannequins, trapping them. Please, you have to come now. There was something in her voice, a desperation too raw to ignore. A senior officer stood abruptly. Assemble a team. We're moving out. The squad rushed to the boutique. Inside, Madame Kadu was still sprawled on the cold backroom floor, unconscious. The mannequins stood silent, their glassy eyes frozen, their bodies still cursed. But the moment Madame Kadu was revived, she was forced to undo what she had done. One by one, the girls stirred, their minds and voices returning to them. Officers stormed through the boutique and into the hidden room, where they discovered a chilling scene, piles of old clothing, mismatched shoes, and broken phones, items that once belonged to missing girls. Diaries filled with names. Photographs. Syringes. Strange rituals carved into wooden coffins, some still sealed. Chimi knelt on the floor, his hands raised, his eyes filled with remorse. He confessed everything without hesitation. Madame Kadu tried to defend herself. You don't understand, she said bitterly. I made them beautiful. They were nothing before I found them, filthy, homeless, unwanted. A female officer, unable to contain her rage, slapped her hard across the face. You turn children into objects, she hissed. News of the horror spread across the nation. The mannequins were alive, headlined every major paper. Uma was interviewed by human rights groups. The boutique was shut down. Madame Kadu received a life sentence with no possibility of parole. As for Chimi, though he was arrested, his full confession and help in saving over 30 other trapped girls earned him clemency. And Uma? She was given a place to live, therapy to heal, and a scholarship to rebuild the life that had been stolen from her. But more than anything, she was given a chance to be free. The message in this story is clear, even in places soaked in darkness, a single spark of hope can ignite change. Uma's tears, small, silent, and almost invisible, became the crack through which the truth escaped. It reminds us, people are not possessions. Every human being matters, no matter their status, appearance, or past. The girls behind the glass weren't decorations. They were daughters, dreamers, survivors, who only made the mistake of trusting the wrong smile. Evil often hides behind luxury. Behind beauty. Behind charm. So remember, not everything that glitters is gold. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more.